It's great to be here today. I'm looking forward to hearing what you all have to say as well. I'm going to talk, the title here is The Value of Parkland. And the word value really, to me, is the key to the discussion here today. Because value is to some extent in the eyes of the beholder. If, you know, I have a business background, obviously, and when you talk about valuing a business, you can look at things like, you know, the amount of sales that the business had, the amount of profits that the business had, and, you know, that's a determining factor. But ultimately, with a business and with even a baseball card, the value of something is what somebody's willing to pay for it. So some people may be willing to pay more for something, and some people would not be. And similarly, a lot depends on what you know about something as to how much you value it. So, you know, I think when we talk about some of the issues we're talking about here, there's a piece of it which is having the information you need to value something, and then there's a piece of it of how do we get that message across. So I want to talk a little bit today about first the valuation part of it and coming up with the economic part of things, and then also talk a little bit about how do we get folks involved and informed about things. And again, the best example I can give is, I think as we were talking before we got started here, is, you know, we're kind of the choir, okay? So, you know, the people here, if I ask you the value of the Catskills, there'd be a very high value placed on it. But there are a lot of people who aren't here today who wouldn't have that opinion, and we need to get the message out to them. And to some extent, you know, Peter provided my background. My background is a little bit more like some of the people that you're going to be talking to, whether it be the business community, organizations of the business community, or even elected officials. So hopefully I can provide a little insight on that as well. Let's try that. There we go. One more time. Oh, there we go, okay. Learning the technology here. So when we talk about the value of parkland, there's kind of a conventional wisdom of, you know, the pros of it and the cons of it, okay? So when we talk about the pros of parkland, why it's a good thing, we talk about the environmental benefits, the natural resources, the habitats, and things of that nature. We talk about quality of life benefits. So you've got, you know, your pure environmental benefits of a natural resource, and then we expand that a little bit more to include some of the things that make it a nice place for the community because it's an attractive area, there's things to do there, recreational opportunities and so forth. And then, you know, ultimately sometimes it comes down to what I'll call moral terms, which is, you know, good versus evil. You've got the good of a natural resource and, you know, the habitat and the animals that live there and the plant life. Then you've got the developer who wants to, you know, kind of plow over the rainforest and, you know, all for their greedy profit motive. And, you know, that kind of a discussion, I think, similar to what Ken was talking about in the Adirondacks, sometimes becomes a hard thing to negotiate because people value things based on principle versus maybe, you know, things that are a little bit easier to compromise on. People don't like to compromise on their principle. And sometimes we get into this kind of a moral dilemma, if you will, and when you phrase things that way, it does become a little bit more visceral in people, and people become very hardened in their opinions of things. Okay, so now let's talk about the other side of the ledger. The negative parts that you hear, the negative feelings that you hear with respect to parkland is it's all subsidized by the taxpayers. These are either the state owns them or not-for-profits own these properties, and they're not paying any property tax. So the rest of us, you know, overtaxed taxpayers have to pay more to make up for the fact that the parkland is not paying any taxes. Okay, so that's one negative. A second follow-up to that is often, you know, the land would be better. We'd all be better off if you could develop that land, okay? If you put something on there that was going to create more economic activity, as opposed to just sitting there doing nothing, okay? You hear that argument a lot. And then the third thing, and I saw The Wizard of Oz on TV the other day, and you know, when people talk about jobs now, they don't say jobs, they say jobs, jobs, jobs. I don't know how many times I've heard that over the last couple of months. It's like in The Wizard of Oz where Dorothy can go back home if she clicks her heels together and says there's no place like home, but she's got to say it 3 times because otherwise it doesn't work. So the same thing I think with jobs now. I think every politician says jobs, jobs, jobs because somehow if you say it 3 times, that means it's 3 times more important than it was if you just said it once. But a lot of things, a lot of the arguments that we hear at the local level as well is related to the economy and how instead of focusing on what's good for the environment and all the costs associated with that, we should be focusing on things that create jobs because that's what's really important, okay? So you hear, I'm sure you're all familiar with arguments on both sides of this, and this is kind of the conventional wisdom, and it's a lot of the discussion that happens here in the Catskills, in the Adirondacks, New York, all over the state, all over the country. So that's what we're trying, I think, needs to be broken out of. So let me go to what I call reality, okay? Trying to get away from the rhetoric and into things that really are more based on facts as opposed to opinions and people's maybe visceral feelings about things. First of all, when we talk about development, what many people don't realize is that when we talk about like housing development, it sounds like that's a good thing for the local economy, it's a good thing for taxpayers because you're increasing the tax base, but the reality is that when you add all those houses and you add the families that come with them, and you add the roads and the infrastructure and the sewers and the electric lines and all that infrastructure that you have to build that the taxpayers have to pay for, typically what ends up happening is that the cost to the community of all that quote-unquote development is more than the tax revenue that is generated by it. I mean, a good example of this is that I know in where I'm from up near Albany, there's a couple of cases where golf courses have gone out of business. So maybe there's a few hundred acres of, you know, quote-unquote parkland, which is now vacant, which the owner wants to get rid of. And the towns are now being faced with really deciding that they may be best off buying that and keeping it from being developed because they couldn't afford the cost to the school districts and to the town in terms of services if that all went to housing. So that's a challenge, and it's an even bigger challenge for the elected officials in the towns to convince the average taxpayer that we should go and spend $1 million to buy a golf course when the taxpayer thinks, why not let it be developed and then we all be better off? But unfortunately the facts don't square with that, you know, popular misconception. So that's a challenge. Secondly, another thing that there have been a number of studies that talk about is how if people who live near parkland have a higher valuation of their property. So that's good for the homeowner from the standpoint that their house is worth more. It's also good for the tax base because now you have more taxable property in the community than you would if you didn't have the parkland there. So they give you tax base, and that's, you know, what everybody's complaining about when they talk about the fact that the park is not taxable. And third, and this is something we'll talk about in a little bit more detail, and it relates to some of the things that Ken talked about, parks and recreation areas can be economic drivers, can be actual benefit to help the economy if we strategize appropriately to take advantage of them. And I think with respect to the Catskills, there's a tremendous opportunity in this area to try to implement some strategies along those lines. So I think all these things are realities that often are lost in the arguments that are had. But an important added aspect of this is the need to quantify the benefits of parkland to the extent that you can. I talked about businesses. You can look at the revenues and the profits and so forth, and you can get a CPA to come in and verify that those numbers are accurate, and you can make judgments, business people make judgments based on those numbers, okay? With respect to recreational activity or, you know, the benefits of parkland, it's not as easy to make that judgment, to make those calculations, but it doesn't mean that those benefits are any less real, okay? People still come to, when they go to hike in the Catskills, if they're coming up from New York City and they're staying in a hotel, if they're buying dinner at a restaurant, if they're buying supplies in town, all those things are real dollars that are being spent in the community. So the challenge is not to say that is it real or is it not real. The challenge is to try to quantify it. And there are ways to do that, and that's one of the things that we're going to talk about here. So when it comes to valuing the economic impact of parkland, there are what's called economic impact models that professors, like we've heard here today, spend their time putting these things together. And they are designed to use information that is available or research that can be done to try to create a model to estimate the benefits associated with things like tourism, based on the number of people that come to the community, where they come from. Park operations, obviously, if you've got people employed by a park or by facilities that support those that infrastructure. And there's obviously a lot of businesses. We heard about canoeing, whether it's hiking, canoeing. In this area, obviously a lot of mountain climbing, rock climbing and things of that nature. All of those businesses are here because of the natural resources that you have that bring people in to take advantage of those businesses. So the models that are available try to calculate that and develop estimates to put that in dollar terms, basically. The one that I'm familiar with, and we talked about the study that I did working with Glenn and Kara, who are here today from the Shawangunk area. The one that I'm familiar with is what's called the MGM model, which was developed by Michigan State. Why that one is in particular a good one for parkland is it was developed for the National Park Service. So it's something that's been used a lot. It's well accepted. And if it's wrong consistently, I guess, across a lot of different platforms. So it's one that's generally accepted. And what it does is it calculates what's called the direct effects. Okay, and that is if I come in and I buy $30 worth of gas, that's $30 that come into the community. There's also what's called secondary or multiplier effects. So if I have to hire another person to work at my store because of all the people coming to the community for the recreational purposes, I'm hiring that employee is getting paid, that employee goes home and buys food, they pay their rent, they do things like that. So there's a lot of what are called secondary effects along those lines, not just the money I spend as a tourist, but the jobs that are created and those people getting paid and spending money. So that goes on, kind of a ripple effect throughout the economy. We also can estimate the amount of taxes that are generated by the activity associated with the parkland, and then we can calculate the number of jobs that are supported, and that's, as I was talking about earlier, number of jobs is a big metric that everybody's concerned about. So, just to use the project that we did for the Shawangunk area as an example, what we found, and the visitor information came from the actual three parks involved. Nearly 400,000 visitors, which is a very significant number. Their annual spending was estimated over $13 million. Local sales taxes, $459,000. Total economic impact, over $12 million. And the number of jobs supported, 358. Now, you hear a lot, when I was on the county legislature, one of the things you do is ribbon cuttings every time some new business opens up, and there's always a press release that goes out about how many jobs are going to be created, how much revenue is going to be generated, and so forth. There weren't too many ribbon cuttings I ever went to that had numbers that good. Those are very, very impressive to me numbers. We talk about 358 jobs. How many employers have 358 jobs in this community? Not too many. But if you look at the amount of dollars we're talking about, the number of jobs we're talking about, it is significant. And it's one thing to be talking about benefits in an abstract case, but I think to be able to show numbers like that, I think that has a real impact, not just on the choir that we have here, but when you talk to chambers of commerce or county officials or state officials, you really have something now that is significant enough that should get their attention, at least to have a conversation with them.